Indie animation grew from teenagers that made online cartoons for fun like Hellbenders or Eddsworld to entire companies like Glitch and Spindlehorse making movie-level animated projects. While the animation quality of pilots like The Art of Murder, Homestuck, and Lackadaisy is stellar, they've all forgotten what a pilot actually is. Instead of creating a short pitch to give us an idea of what the show would be like if it got funding, people now carelessly spend tons of resources to give us first full episodes, with no backing at all. Knights of Guinevere, Dungeon Flippers, and Wastelandia all fall in this category, and while they look great, they're all just not pilots. But what is a pilot? Pilots are test pitches for shows that you send to a network to convince them of giving you financial backing for a season. Without studio backing, the animation may be worse than the final product, and characters usually sound, act, or look different. A good pilot must give us an idea of what an average episode of the show would look like, and we should be able to easily imagine what later episodes could consist of. They're also usually short and must tell us about the characters, world, tone, target audience, and if it's episodic, all in a self-contained story so it can't bleed into the official series. So that this doesn't feel ethereal, I'll tie my explanation to examples of 3 very different pilots that work well functionally and in other aspects, namely Helluva Boss, Adventure Time, and Utopia. First, my favorite pilot being Helluva Boss's. We get an explanation of the premise in less than 3 minutes. Then for the rest of the episode, it fleshes out each of the characters by having them simply interact with each other with a few flashbacks. It's also hilariously creative, and its mean-spirited nature creates an environment where the highly frequent use of cursing feels at home and punchy.
Look, I don't judge the boring couple stuff you do outside of work hours, so don't judge me.
Oh, I do judge you, sir. Quite a lot, actually.
Mox, he's our boss!
No, it's fine, Mills. Your husband is just, how do I say this without being offensive? Retarded.
In just 11 minutes, it's functionally incredible and should be seen as a standard for cartoon internet pilots. Unlike Helluva Boss's pilot, Adventure Time's looks a lot worse than the official version and has rougher, weird versions of the characters, but it has all the bones of what the show ends up being like. The premise of Finn and Jake going on wacky adventures and the characters are all easily identifiable, and it's clear that it'll be a lighthearted, absurd comedy.
Thanks.
It's no problem!
Oh, real nice. How old are you?
I'm 12 years old!
I'm 28.
While it's extremely rough around the edges, we're given just the idea of the show as opposed to good presentation, and Adventure Time being picked up despite these bad initial visuals shows what matters the most when it comes to pilots, the concept. Utopia never got a show, and the pilot was made in 2001, so it won't get one. But it's still a great pilot due to its uniqueness. It's very down to earth, but it's absurd in a way that feels chill, which isn't something I've seen in anything else aside from maybe 12-ounce Mouse. Apart from it being functionally solid, the tone, style, and silly jokes make it memorable thanks to this one factor.
I have a plan. Well, begin the onslaught.
Helluva Boss was good because it was snappy and we got the premise immediately. Adventure Time was rougher without a fully figured out world, but it has a strong, clear premise, and Utopia had an extremely unique, down-to-earth yet absurd vibe that alone let you imagine what a season of it could look like. Even though all these pilots are totally different, they all follow the rules of what a pilot actually is, which is what let them have the backbone to stand up by themselves and be as great as they were, allowing us to be able to imagine what they'd all be like if they had shows. As for the pilots I chose for this video, they're all stunning on a surface level, but they conflict with how a pilot is supposed to function, or they simply do their job poorly. Some of you might think this is stupid or nitpicky, so here's why this distinction matters. Knowing what a pilot is necessary because they're sometimes integral for if a show will even exist or not, and that's why not having an emphasis on good animation, music, or voice acting is better because you're focusing on just the pitch due to funding not being secured. Pilots by Glitch, for example, totally warped the idea of what a pilot should be like for indie creators because, let's be honest, Glitch is a very rich, big company that already has absurdly successful shows like Murder Drones and Digital Circus under their belt. That's not really indie, even though people say they are, and since their pilots are so successful, regular internet animation fans now expect that level of high quality production, even though normal people don't have their level of resources. This leads to a few really bad outcomes for normal people and specifically Glitch. If you make a regular pilot with lower quality surface level aspects like Hugo's Mind Palace or Phantom Warning, they don't get noticed because their pilot's not on the same level as a Glitch, so it's immediately unimpressive to most since a lot of people are now used to a corporation's level of animation. If a single creator or group tries to make some really high quality animation like Dungeon Flippers, they can't sustain it because that level of quality is extremely expensive to keep consistent per episode and time consuming, so it's a massive loss on their end if their gamble doesn't work out like The Art of Murder. And even for Glitch, when they create extremely high quality short films that are falsely called pilots, with mid to bad writing like Knights of Guinevere and Gaslight District, and they massively underperform, they just lose a ton of money and time in the attempt to get another digital circus. In short, if we don't make what a pilot actually is clear, then everyone who wants to make one suffers since they'd be working on the wrong aspects of what makes a good pilot, and pilots that don't have as great service level qualities get sidelined. It'd be way more beneficial to think of a pilot as something like Becky, Prim, or Pretty Please, because these not only follow the rules of what a pilot functionally is, but also because animation and runtime wise, they're what we should expect given what pilots have always been and their purpose in the show making process. Lackadaisy, Art of Murder, and Wastelandia are not pilots because they're either short films, absurdly well animated first episodes, or they fail at what a pilot is supposed to be, which is Wastelandia's problem. Wastelandia. Wastelandia's only correct element is that it's as short as a pilot should be, but it has a plethora of its own unique issues. For the most part, I'll break up each pilot into characters and plot, tone, target audience, world building, and average episode plus season potential with a few differences. Do note that I'll often not factor in art or animation quality, since those factors don't impact the pilot's functional quality. Characters and plot. These characters are blank slates with hard to remember names that spend a runtime pettily complaining about mundane annoyances they went through that day instead of talking to each other or doing something. Nothing pushes them to show off who they actually are or their character traits, and because of this, we learn nothing about who they are, just what happened to them. We just gain aspects of their life that aren't important to anything else in the pilot. Moth's terminally online, Alice likes art, and Zoe likes video games. That's all. This is why their names are hard to remember, because there's nothing attached to them aside from their designs. I assume their complaints are supposed to be relatable, but it just makes them unlikable, since this is all that we know these characters for. Moth is annoyed that people who don't know her misgendered her and call her cringe. Zoe dropped out of college for no reason to play video games, and apparently her parents are the bad ones for scolding her for that. And Alice just worries about messing up her art for an art critique. These are all just small annoyances that happen to them, or things I can't sympathize with. Why should we be on Zoe's side when she dropped out, not to pursue a passion, but just to play video games for 12 hours a day? All we get is that these three characters are kinda just losers. I'm not saying these have to be super deep characters or anything. Normal pilots usually at max only have about 11 minutes, so that'd be extremely difficult. But Wastelandia fails at even giving us basic traits to work with, and things get worse when you factor in the fact that this wants to be a slice of life show. You typically have no plot or major conflicts, so those shows only work because we care a lot about the characters. Agretsuko's good despite almost every conflict having extremely low stakes because we care a lot about the characters and we want to see them succeed in what they want to do. Why would we care about traitless characters doing low stakes activities or going through unserious small annoyances in life? Tone. The pilot's confused by its tone, and for some moments it's hard to tell if you're supposed to resonate with the character or laugh. Zoe complaining about her parents and saying that she's just seen as a trash child with her head turning into a possum feels like a dark joke, but Moth takes it completely seriously. But then there are other moments that are clearly jokes, like Moth being mad about her being called cringe, and a lot of background internet culture references. Neither of these moments, which are totally opposites, occur frequently enough for Wastelandia to have a clear tone. It wants to make you laugh, but it wants to make you feel bad too, and since it doesn't go all the way, it feels weak when it could have been more clear if it just picked a lane. Target audience. This show feels terminally online with things like how Moth fakes Reddit stories, Zoe playing Neopets all day, and all the references to memes or classically funny internet images in the background. With it also having elements like Moth being annoyed about being misgendered, it makes me feel like this was for a very specific niche of very artsy or terminally online girls. That's not necessarily bad. Hazbin Hotel does the same thing and it's highly successful, and other things like MLP has a massive audience outside of its target demographic since it's so damn good, but let's be honest, that's just not most people, and instead like less than 1% of the population. Even then, it'd have to be good for that 1% to latch onto it and enjoy it, but it's not, so perform like a regular upload from this creator. World building. This is just a real world with furries. If you change the furries to regular humans, nothing would change, and actually, the world just being ours would have been more clear fast, since we'd have humans in a normal environment. Average episode plus season potential. With personality-less characters, a confused tone, a highly niche target audience, and no interesting world building, it's impossible to imagine what the average episode of Wastelandia would consist of. Will these characters go through something serious, or will it be an episodic, low-stakes slice-of-life comedy? Will the world become more Wastelandish since that's the name of the show? Will it actually be a serialized comedy? It could be any of those things because the pilot gives us nothing. Functionally, the pilot completely fails because it basically doesn't even try. How it could have been better. Wastelandia could have been better in two ways. One, it could have taken the Helluva Boss route and have these three characters simply speak to each other, reminisce on some things, or have them go through something difficult together so we can know how they are and how they'd react to a hard situation. Or way two, just make it a mean comedy. leading into how petty and pathetic these characters are and the fact that their biggest worries in life are being misgendered, called cringe, playing Neopets too much, or losing a single painting for an art critique. Simply make it absurd without trying to make us feel sympathy for them. That way, it'd be Helluva Boss-esque, but still very different since these characters are different and there's no violence, so instead we're just watching obviously insufferable people suffer. Conclusion. I'm not really sure why anyone would think this is good, so if you thought Wastelandia was a stellar pilot, please explain deeply as to why in the comments, because there's literally nothing to this. It's just good animation and 3 characters complaining about stuff that nobody in the universe would even care about, which is why it's functionally the worst pilot I'll talk about today. While the next pilot still fails at actually being a pilot, writing wise it's definitely a step up from Wastelandia, even though it leaves a lot to be desired. By the way, if you're liking this video, then subscribe and become a member so you can see extra videos and videos like this early. Knights of Guinevere. While Knights is better than Wastelandia, that's the lowest bar cleared imaginable, and it doesn't really beat it out. Where Wastelandia very obviously told us too little, Knights pretends to tell us a lot while truly giving us nothing to work with. There's not a more obvious example of this than the plot plus characters. Knights introduces a million things and then never expands on them to try to be mysterious. So we just wonder stuff like who's Olivia, or why does everyone hate the floating island and the princess, and who's this old woman? But then it gives us enough so that it's actually not mysterious. The old woman is Olivia, we get that from the subtitles. We understand the floating island is where the rich people live, and the normal people live below it. And we get enough info about the princess robot to understand how she works and what she is. This pilot, in massive air quotes, isn't satisfying in either theory crafting or we get it sense. And since it tries to set up so much, it ends up being confusing. I didn't initially get that Olivia was the old woman, mostly because I did not connect this time skip to Olivia becoming really old, because it's just a time skip that pertains to the specific moment of them becoming adults. And I thought the scene of Frankie and Dee getting the Guinevere princess doll out of the crane game was just a dream since it's in a black void, but this is actually supposed to be a park. Things should be more clear because it's 26 minutes, but most of the short film wastes your time. In fact, despite that long runtime, it basically gives us no time characterizing Frankie and Dee outside of very simple traits. All we learn about them personality wise is that Frankie is tough and rebellious, and Dee is frail and a big rule follower, though this is obvious by their character designs. These traits are expressed really weakly, so it's practically nothing, and I can't bring myself to care about either of them since they're just not the charming and charismatic women the show wants you to think they are. They're just broke criminals hurting some guy's income source for a chance of fixing up some infamous robot they really know nothing about. Helluva Boss's pilot was so good because even though the character personalities were simple, they were extremely strong and each of them were put in situations that pushed them so we could learn about who they are. Knights of Guinevere has nothing like this, and it just copies the same problems Wastelandia had. Tone plus cursing. The show wants to be for adults, but its art style holds it back. Usually art styles don't bother me, but this show looks like the Owl House, a specifically Disney XD kids show. So whenever these characters curse or if something violent happens, I'm like, wait, isn't this a Disney XD cartoon? It doesn't help that the cursing is overused and doesn't fit the characters like Dee given the minuscule kilobytes worth of info we're given about her. The art style conflicts with the tone, so the tone's weakened by it. You'd think that it's lighthearted, but generally it's not, and when it tries to make jokes, which is rare, it's not funny enough to be entertaining in that way either. I laughed at none of the jokes in this, and at most, I just breathed out my nose when Dee dropped the red electricity stick on accident. Target audience. It feels like a kid's show with cursing and blood, but without any of the other aspects that should have grown up with it. So I'm not sure who this is for. Kids or young teens shouldn't watch this because of the blood and cursing, but the immature use of curse words in the kids show art style would probably conflict with most people's ability to take it seriously, because it comes across as edgy. My guess is that it's for adults that really like Owl House or something and want more of it, but that's clearly a small audience since only 15 million people saw this and nobody really cares about this one. World building. Its world building is confusing, surface level, and not special. Rich people live on some floating island, normal people live on the crappy surface world. We've seen this similar idea in stuff like WALL-E and Astro Boy from 2009, and the only thing that differentiates this from movies like that is a princess robot, but again, she's not interesting because we've already gained too much info about her, but not enough to be sucked into her personality or her character motivations. Average episode plus season potential. There's only 2 real ways I see this series continuing. One is that they'll expand more into what the rogue princess can do, and we learn about the probably secret group of people controlling everything, and Frankie and Dee are the knights who must stop them. Or the characters will go with the princess as she uncovers dark secrets as they get hunted all the time. Both these directions are very predictable, so immediately it's not very interesting, and honestly, I can't see this being more than 6 episodes unless they add a lot of new elements. How it could have been better. If we remove the cursing, every scene would be stronger. Frankie's boss scolding her, and when he talked about her stealing stuff are both scenes that felt punchier and way more natural than when he curses about there being no customer discount.
You stole my boat. You stole my android, and now you're throwing a tantrum like a child. You know what happens when you break the rules. There's no damn repeat customer discount. Fuck's sake.
This is because, again, imagining a character in the Owl House art style cursing is more funny than anything, and if it was done unironically, then it just feels childish because of where the art style comes from. If Guinevere got rid of all the cursing and was for younger audiences, it'd be more effective assuming it kept the same art style. Starting at the 10-minute mark would have been a great choice, since Frankie first finding the robot is the most shocking moment. From there, we could cut scenes like when the old Olivia wanted to find the princess, and the explanation of there being multiple versions of the princess could have been communicated to us by regular background elements instead. This way, it would have been more of a mystery, and we'd save a lot of time, and about time, it should have been used more efficiently so that we can get to know the characters. All that had to be done was for us to have Frankie and Dee be put in uncomfortable or unfamiliar situations, or for them to maybe disagree about something, which could have given us a lot more about who they are and how they're like under pressure. The rogue princess robot could have even been a character in the pilot too, since usually pilots aren't canon, and this is supposed to be the test and pitch phase for character interactions. These are the main issues the short film faces, and there are other issues, but these are the ones that should be fixed first. Conclusion plus glitch criticism. Functionally, it fails as a pilot, and even as a first episode, it wastes a ton of time and isn't very engaging. There's no interesting story, the characters are bland, it has a weird conflict with art style and foul language, it's not at all taking place in a unique world. I saw a comment that said they forgot that this was a pilot for indie animation, and I'd say that's not surprising since it's both not actually a pilot and not really indie animation. Everyone only speaks on the short film's outer aspects, nobody actually talks about the story of this since it sucks, so I'll join in because it'll be a while before I speak on Glitch or their other cartoons again. Outside of being a bad pilot, Night's Like Gaslight District is another failure at Glitch's attempt to make another digital circus, and the only reason why anyone thinks this is notable is because people somehow think Glitch is indie, and it has incredible animation. But I have to ask, how in the world is Glitch really indie at this point when they're certainly worth millions and they can create two 30-minute short films with totally different art and animation styles 5 months apart? They're not even animated in the same dimension. Why do we still say it's super impressive that a very successful rich company with tons of resources that has a show streaming on Netflix can do this when it's obviously just a big gimmick to sell merch and stay relevant by wowing us with animation? I mean, it's so obvious. Gaslight District and Knights of Guinevere have merch and they're both pilots. They're not even shows. If we say they're truly indie, we have to say that they're in the same category as stuff like Terrible Mouse, Madness Combat, Ed's World, Brain Dump, or Space King. How is this not asinine? Dungeon Flippers. This pilot is interesting because even though it works in most ways a pilot is supposed to, it still fails massively. It's only 16 minutes long, it functions not as a first episode, but a clear showcase of ideas and what they want to do if this became a series, and it characterizes our main character solidly. But the issue with this one is that its premise isn't that interesting. Since the issues with this one are different from the others, I'll format this section very differently and shortly. Functionality success doesn't equal good automatically, plus bland. Premises for shows can sound really dumb, but how good they end up being depends on the execution. Scott Pilgrim sounds dumb since it's about a guy who has to fight his girlfriend's 7 evil exes so he can peacefully date her, but it has surprisingly flawed, grounded, and sometimes relatable characters, great action, unique comedic moments, and character arcs that'll hit you no matter who you are. Plus, it's timeless, so people even now enjoy it despite it coming out 21 years ago. Dungeon Flipper's premise of being about two fantasy creatures in a basic fantasy world selling real estate is a very simple, dumb, and boring premise, but that doesn't automatically make it bad. The problem with Flippers is that it just plays this straight. It goes exactly like how you'd expect it to go if this premise was executed by normal writers, so everything just ends up being fine. Characterization wise, it's fine. We learn that Cleveland is a laid-back mentor for the younger, hot-headed Molly, who wants to use the money she earns from this job to fix her family's house, but they're too uninteresting to remember, so I had to look them up so I could make sure I got their names down correctly. Design-wise, the characters are fine. They aren't good since Cleveland is just a blue dragon guy in a suit and Molly's just like a minotaur or something. The jokes are fine. I didn't laugh out loud at any of them, but I didn't find any unfunny, as I smirked and breathed out of my nose in reaction to each. The pacing was fine, the dialogue was fine, everything functioned, but nothing was notable. And I'm not even saying this is a bad premise or anything. All it had to do was subvert our expectations by making the fantasy world unique, the characters wild, or by going in a direction nobody could have foreseen given the premise. The webtoon Take My Muffin has a premise kind of like this, where the main characters are just business startuppers and we got one guy who generates incredible ideas every episode, But that show is so good because every episode subverts your expectations, and it has a ton of really creative jokes, and it takes its story in an unpredictable, interesting, serious direction. If Dungeon Flippers just gave us more to sink our teeth into outside of the teeny break of character info that we get, and if it did better than just mediocre, then it would have been a better pilot. It's like the writers were already fine at writing, and they asked AI how to make a pilot. Then they followed the AI's instructions while only making small tweaks, but since it's an AI and it gets its sources from everywhere, the already fine writers made something fine. Functionally, outside of the very good animation, it just works at everything it tries to do, but why would that matter if it's not interesting or noteworthy outside of that? How it could have been better. I don't think the premise needs to change, but there needs to be way more to it since there's a lot of ways this could have been better as someone who likes the premise. I'll list a few. First, have us get into the personal and work lives of Molly and Cleveland, and make a place where there could be more characters for them to talk to. Then it could be like Helluva Boss, where they recount events or customer interactions in order to establish the tone, flesh out the world, and to characterize our mains. 2 main characters this simple isn't enough for an engaging show, especially since their traits are so weak. Second, they could have made the world more interesting. It being a basic fantasy world with phones is pretty lame, so why not make it a futuristic fantasy world that may be set during some really bad time, like the aftermath of a war and a large underclass is created because of it. Then in this world, Molly and Cleveland could be part of the few upper class people who do white collar work, with Molly wanting to help others of a lower economic class because of what happened to her family home, and Cleveland being indifferent to that due to him not having that experience. And through some conflicts between the two, we could learn who they are better and more about this world. I'm just spitballing here, of course, but by simply making the world slightly more complex, it opens the door to so many more interesting ideas that could be tried within the pilot as opposed to the world just being the setting and nothing more. Third, the writers could have simply leaned more heavily into comedy while strengthening Molly and Cleveland's characters to make them more antagonistic towards each other, then dish the whole Molly backstory. Having them attempt to sell something to a customer, but then Cleveland says something wrong or small and then Molly corrects him and then they begin arguing could already lead to funny scenarios. It was something like that for a while until maybe you introduce new characters or a dynamic shift between the two. It could be way more funny. From engaging to interesting to simply funny, this could have been improved in a lot of ways, but notice that these are massive changes. Dungeon Flippers as it is needs a whole rework in order to escape being mediocre. Conclusion. Unlike the last two, Dungeon Flippers works. But just working doesn't mean it's good. I've already likened it and compared it to a few things, but it's like a microwave with a 10 number numpad, with each number corresponding to minutes equaling them when you press them instead of specific seconds. That's fine, it'll do your job and warm up your food, but it could be so much better if you could set it to 45 seconds instead of a minute, so then you're never forced to stop it at 15 seconds because, okay. If this seems specific, it's because it is. I really want a better microwave. Before closing the video, I want to talk about one more pilot briefly since this has been my least favorite pilot ever since I first saw it, and I probably won't get this chance again. Before that, I really want to say that Dungeon Flippers is practically trying to make their episode 2 as opposed to episode 1 with a Kickstarter, and I didn't really have an issue with the pilot kind of being episode 1 because it's an episodic show, and with that kind of thing, the pilot basically being episode 1 sometimes isn't that bad. Now if it's like Adventure Time's pilot, that being episode 1, that wouldn't make any sense. But with how Dungeon Flippers is, it kind of makes a little bit more sense. I personally still don't think that's a really good decision. I think it would have been better if it focused more on being a pilot. But that is something that I wanted to mention before I decided to tackle Art of Murder. So for full clarification's sake, it's not nearly as bad for an episodic show to have a pilot that basically functions as episode 1, even though I still think that's bad, and if you do that, that's not a good decision, but it's way worse if you're trying to be serialized like Knights of Guinevere and Gaslight District, for example. And of course, this one, Art of Murder, which I'm going to talk about now. The Art of Murder. This came out a year ago, and it feels that everything functionality-wise like the previous pilots I talked about when it comes to being a pilot. Its animation quality is unnecessarily high, it functions as a first episode, and outside of that, other important aspects like dialogue and characterization are extremely weak. Everyone's a parody version of something popular that already exists, like Sosuke being an obvious parody of Sasuke, or Albi being a general parody of 2D Disney princesses, for example. But it doesn't even subvert these tropes. Every character except Albi acts like the tropes they're quote-unquote parodying. And with Albi, her thing is that she's into being an entrepreneur, though that's an extremely weak, irrelevant trait that doesn't matter in the pilot. But its biggest issue outside of the dialogue, which feels AI generated and then edited to be intentionally worse, the runtime which is bloated like crazy, or even the jokes which all fall flat, has to be the premise. It's about drunks coming to life at night. Most of the drawings are fan art of characters from existing shows within this universe, but one of them is an original character. Then the next night, after the drawings wake up, they find him ripped out of the page and we're left to question who murdered him. Problem is that we don't get any hints as to who could have been the killer, and we just see by the end that the dog did it, so it wasn't any of them. Meaning that the only thing the next part of this could consist of would either be the characters falsely accusing someone, them realizing the dog did it, or them coming together and realizing none of them did anything wrong, because this is yet another first episode pretending to be a pilot. Alternatively, it could go into Pip's personal life, since it's ham-fistedly told to us that she doesn't have any friends. But we don't really get anything about Pip in the pilot, so there's no reason to expect this. The only way this pilot could have been interesting is if it started like how it normally did with some dialogue changes, and then it took a wild direction in order to subvert your expectations for dark comedy's sake. Maybe the characters start using foul language and they get scared like a sausage party when they realize that their life that they thought was safe wasn't, since any of them can just be killed in their sleep. That's not what we got though, and Art of Murder plays it completely straight all the way through, leading to a difficult to stomach experience, assuming you don't have a 7-year-old's taste in cartoons. Final conclusion. Hopefully this was an interesting dissection to you on what makes a pilot, and why these new pilots that keep coming out just aren't really pilots. If you liked it, then subscribe, because all I do on this channel is talk about web cartoons and web comics, and eventually I'll make a web series. I kinda am, watch my Blood Pretty stuff. Become a member if you want to see some videos early. I'll see you guys in whatever I post next. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, I hope God blesses you. See you guys later.